Hello and welcome to bonus episode number 2. In this episode we'll cover the ancestry of North American oat and barley cultivars. Before we begin, we must talk about the difference between 2-row and 6-row barley. Both lineages are derived from different strains of barley. 2-row barley has plumper and fatter kernels, with a lot more biochemistry related to brewing within each seed, making them well suited for brewing beer. It comes with lower yield, however. 6-row barley, on the other hand, has smaller seeds but a lot more of them, with quite a few more rows of seeds on the spike. 2-row barley has, 2 rows of seeds, while 6-row barley has 6 rows of seeds. 6-row barley is less suited for brewing and is oftentimes utilized for feed purposes, although there are some cultivars utilized for brewing beer. You'll start with a paper by Dr. E. Souza and Dr. M. E. Sorrells. Here are the results of the pedigree analysis of different cultivars. Between 1951 to 1960, 75 cultivars of oat were released in North America, and half the parentage consisted of 5 cultivars. Between 1978 and 1985, the number of cultivars developed decreased to 46, but the pedigree had a larger number of different cultivars within its pedigree. 8 genotypes constituted half of the parentage of that germplasm group. Between 1951 and 1986, 205 cultivars were released. 6 cultivars supplied half of the gene pool of this cultivar base. 10 major cultivars played a major role in the breeding programs involving oat breeding. These included Victoria, Milton, Red Rust Proof, Landhafer, Hajira, Kierson, Green Russian, Red Algerian, Banner, and Santa Fe. As new cultivars were bred, the cultivars Hajira and Milton increased in appearance within the cultivars that were bred as a parental lineage. All the other cultivars had smaller amounts of contributions to the DNA of the different cultivars bred as time went on. The amount of Victoria and Milton pedigree within all existing cultivars, however, remained constant over time, as there are prominent parents within all the oat genomes of that era. Earlier cultivars seem to have had more variation in terms of which cultivars played a major role within the breeding program, while as we get into more modern times, such as the 1970s and 1980s, that level of variance went down, indicating that although a greater number of parents are used in the breeding program, the primary foundation stock became more uniform. In terms of the pedigree of these cultivars, it could be genetically separated into 6 broad groups, called clusters. Cluster 1 is a Landhafer cluster. 55% of its genetics, on average, comes from the cultivar Landhafer. 8% comes from Milton, 7% comes from Red Algerian, and 5% comes from Green Russian. The rest of it is unknown. The Victoria cluster obtains 44% of its genetic material from Victoria, 14% on average from Red Rust Proof, 9% from National, and 7% from Hajira. For cluster free, it's Red Rust Proof 35%, Victoria 14%, Winter Turf and Santa Fe are 8% each. For a central cluster, Victoria and Milton take up 11% each, Landhafer takes up 10%, and Green Russian takes up 6%. For the Kierson cluster, 20% of the pedigree is taken up by Kierson, 15% by Green Russian, and 14% for Victoria and Milton, respectively. And the Canadian cluster consists of 20% Hajira, 16% Milton, 12% Victoria, and 9% Banner. The majority of cultivars bred during the time period of 1951 to 1987 are of the central cluster. Here are the resulting trends from this experiment. Cultivars like Red Algerian, Hajira, and Red Rust Proof Mediterranean cultivars are appearing less frequently within the pedigree of the oak cultivars between 1951 and 1985, while cultivars from northern and central Europe are increasing in prominence. For the genetic diversity of 6-row spring barley, you'll be talking about a paper by R.D. Horsley, P.B. Swartz, and J.J. Hammond. Within the pedigree of barley within North America, a small number of cultivars made up the majority of the pedigree of our North American varieties. In my home country of Canada, the true North Strong and Free, the cultivar Manchuri played a major role within the breeding program, with this cultivar being used most often within the majority of the breeding programs. The cultivars Michigan 31604 and Common 6-Road are tied for second place in terms of how often they're used within the breeding program, while the cultivars Lion, Ollie, and Peatland are tied for third place. In Minnesota, Manchuria, Lion, Manchuri, Oldbrooker, Peatland, and Ollie are all used in equal amounts, and as you can see by the image on the screen, there's different varieties utilized in the Minnesota program versus the Canadian program, although there's still some overlap. In North Dakota, Lion makes up the lion's share, so to speak, of the pedigree, alongside Oldbrooker. Manchuri and Peatland take up second place. The cultivar CI 7177-77 takes up third place, and Manchuria appears the least often within the breeding program in North Dakota. Interestingly enough, the cultivars Lion, Manchuri, and Peatland appear in all of the above cultivar groups. This indicates a relatively narrow genetic pool to draw from in terms of North American barley. Another interesting factor observed in this experiment was that the Canadian and Minnesota programs produced excellent malting quality barley cultivars, while North Dakota did not. Another factor is that the cultivars in the North American breeding program are more closely related to each other than they are to the Canadian breeding program varieties. Cluster 3 utilized at that time of the writing of this report older stock plants released prior to 1946 before extensive breeding for improving malt quality was done. As such, the malt cultivars of North Dakota were poor at the time of this paper's writing. To finish off everything, talking about North American barley cultivars, we'll finish off by talking about J.M. Martin's paper on the pedigree of 2-row barley and 6-row barley. Within the North American 6-row cultivars, prior to 1971, the cultivar Trebi made up on average 42% of the pedigree of 6-row cultivars. Coast made up on average 31%, Line 83%, Peatland 29%, Manchuria 46%, Mansory 43%, and Ollie 18%. Since 1971, the amount of times that these cultivars made an appearance within the pedigree of such cultivars has increased. A similar phenomenon has happened within 2-row cultivars as well, including a 2-row version of the Lion cultivar. The research also found that half of the 6-row cultivars utilized as of the writing of this paper were released prior to 1971, while 16 out of the 45 cultivars released of 2-row barley were released prior to 1971. The increasing parentage of specific pedigree within the germplasm of 6-row cultivars after 1971 makes sense, as at that time, most of the cultivars were bred from the older cultivars that had those prominent ancestors. The cultivar line made up 88% of the 6-row cultivar pedigrees. This is because it produces a smooth awn, and that trait is passed on simply as a single gene trait, making it a prominent cultivar to be used in breeding program. How genetically diverse the lines are, however, remains to be seen, as it is possible that many of these cultivars used for the breeding program are related to each other, as they came from similar areas. Indeed, the cultivars Manchuria Mansory and Odenbucker are considered to be all descendants of one single variety. The germplasm range for molting barley cultivars is very narrow, but despite the situation, there's still been gradual improvements in the genetics nonetheless, both in terms of yield and quality due to intense selection pressure. But in order to continue this trend, breeders going forward would have to interbreed with other cultivars that may not be suitable to our environment, but nonetheless have favorable genes that can be passed on to the resulting progeny. And that about covers everything. Thank you for watching.